It's time to talk about Nigeria's image. And going by the Transparency International report, Nigeria ranks 136th out of 175 countries with a score of 27 out of 100 on the Corruption Perception Index. This is indicative of a shift in the perception around corruption in Nigeria, and no doubt a move in the right direction. What really would you say, you're watching, what really would you say is Nigeria's image? Is it a bad image? Is it a good one? Is the corruption issues a reality or a perception? Well, we have in the studio this morning the Chief Executive Officer of the National Competitive Council of Nigeria, Mr. Chika Mordi. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, and the National Competitive Council of Nigeria. Competitiveness Council of Nigeria. Would you like to just lay the background of this organization?
Yes, I will. I think, look, don't worry, I make the same mistakes as well, and everyone I meet typically thinks more of competition than competitiveness, and there is a clear difference. So the idea is, if you think of Nigeria and you think of where we are, and typically you think of oil, and there's this narrative which we'll talk about image-wise, where you think, oh, if we manage our oil resources better, then everyone will sort of prosper in Nigeria, and that's a very false narrative. And the reality is that we need more than oil to prosper, and if you realize that, then the markets have to work to put people out of poverty. It's the employment that is generated and the value generated by businesses across the country that can pull Nigeria out of poverty and make us have the right outcomes. Now, the NCCN, our job, we're a non-partisan public-private organization, is to get the markets to work in such a way that businesses that operate in Nigeria are productive and we can have the desired economic outcomes.
Okay, and so that's what the National Competitiveness Council of Nigeria does. But
yes.
Now, Nigeria's image, would you say the bad image, would you say it is a reality or just a perception?
I think it's perception, definitely. I mean, there's no doubt that reality itself for Nigeria is not very pretty, but the perception is much worse than the reality. And if you make a lot of progress in improving that reality, if the perception stays bad, then a lot of that progress is not only lost, but it makes it difficult to make gains. And I think there's a big perception problem, not just external in terms of outside Nigeria, but even internal in terms of how we Nigerians view Nigeria as well.
So how do you think this perception challenge that you say, you see it as a perception, not a reality, or not so much of a reality? How did we get here to think that from outside Nigeria and even within, people think that the country is not doing very well?
Very good question. And I see it's not so much perception of reality, I see a misalignment, just to clear that point, is a misalignment. So it's much worse than we're seeing, and we see ourselves, than we actually are. And it's something that I've thought deeply about, but there are a variety of factors that drive this. Okay. Some of it applies not just to Nigeria, but is almost continent-wide. So if you think of how international media reports Africa, it tends to be a negative narrative, one of conflict, one of wars, of disease, or one of famine, one where aid is required, and a continent where they can manage themselves. So this is the way we tend to see Africa if we look at international media. And that trickles down even into local media. Now that is a body problem. Now if you get more specific, first of all, we influence the way we are seen. There are a lot of studies that have driven this. I did one of those studies for 12 months as well. And there's a link between how a country is perceived, right, in a society, and the foreign policy of the country, of that society, as well as how the media reports it. Now, when you think of Nigeria and you compare to a country like Italy or Mexico, if you're Italy, you have many avenues from which people can see your country. They could see you in terms of Italian food, Italian cuisine. They could see you in terms of designer clothes from Italy. they pursue in terms of Italian cars. And so even though there's the mafia and you have a dysfunctional political system, which they have in Italy, it doesn't quite rub off as badly because people can relate to Italy in many different ways. Same thing with Mexico, which by the way is in a much worse state than Nigeria when it comes to violence, control of the state, and many other factors. But they have avenues from which they are saying that influence that. But if you sit down in Europe or North America, you're more likely to get in touch with a Nigerian either by an email that is trying to scam you, or what you see on television and the media that talks about Boko Haram and this false narrative of squandered oil wealth and corruption.
But you cannot say it's a false narrative, would you? When you look at the amount of corruption that seems to pervade the land at the moment.
There's corruption in Nigeria. I'm not naive to say there's not. There's a lot of corruption, and we could talk a lot about it. I believe some of the previous speakers spoke about corruption. But the reality is that there's corruption in a lot of places. If you look at the Transparency International ranking we referred to, and look at the top 10 countries there.
Yeah, we're just taking it off. We're just looking at Nigeria's ranking in terms of the perception. But please go ahead.
Okay.
So the rules.
Okay,
we have it back
now. The indices. Talk us through that in terms of what we're seeing there.
Okay, so the corruption, we saw previously that we had a poor ranking in corruption, but it was an improvement of 8 places. So it's still in a very bad place, but it was an improvement of 8 places. And it didn't happen because there was a mistake in how it was computed. It happened because there were real changes, and I'll give you 2 quick ones. One of those is, if you remember the fuel subsidy scams, and when we had queues for fuel, right, that whole thing led to some people going to jail and contracts being re-awarded and a more transparent process, which not only took away the fuel queues, but took away the corruption that had to do with that. A second example is the fertilizer scam. Most of the fertilizers used to end up middlemen who sold in the open market at twice the cost. Today, with this electronic system, it goes directly to the farmers. That again took away corruption. So there are some baby steps, I'll call them those, but we are definitely seeing some changes. Still very corrupt, but those changes are there. And I think it would be unfair and not even morally correct to hold certain people accountable for corruption in our society. What do I mean by this? I mean there are 2 forms of corruption. This is my view. One is the corruption of need, one is the corruption of greed. The corruption of need is where a guy is paid a wage that is not livable, and you say to him, don't be corrupt. So I pay you wages for 1 month that won't last for a week. I have a wife and 4 kids. You give me a gun, I go to a checkpoint, and you tell me, you know what, don't be corrupt, and you hold me to that. The other is of greed. I have enough resources. I want to get richer. I have this criminal intent, and of course, rightfully, you can morally prosecute me. So until we pay a livable wage and have that conversation about what's a livable wage, it's going to be harder and maybe even immoral to hold people to those sort of standards.